The envelope sat on Marcus Webb's desk for 11 days before anyone opened it. It was a standard manila envelope, rubber-banded twice, the kind that held documents nobody wanted to read. It had arrived from the legal department of Caldwell & Rowe Consulting Group on a Wednesday morning, and by Wednesday afternoon it had already been moved from the in-tray to the edge of the desk, then to the corner credenza, then quietly tucked beneath a stack of quarterly reports no one was reviewing. The name typed on the label was not Marcus's. It was not the name of anyone in that corner office or in the adjoining suite or on any of the brass nameplates lining the 14th floor. The name on that envelope was Deja Simmons. She did not yet know it was waiting for her. At the time the envelope arrived, Deja was in the break room on 12, pouring hot water over a tea bag she'd brought from home because she had not yet learned where the supply closet was. She had been at Caldwell & Rowe for exactly 11 days. She was 29 years old. She wore a charcoal blazer she'd bought 2 years earlier from a department store clearance rack, the kind of blazer that looked right from 8 feet away and showed its age at 4. She had one blazer and she rotated it with a deep burgundy cardigan. She had 2 pairs of work slacks. She pressed everything herself every morning at 6 before her daughter woke up. She had not yet been formally introduced to most of her colleagues. She had introduced herself. That was different. When she had done it the first morning, she had gone desk to desk during the 90-second window while people settled their coats and checked their phones, and she had said her name clearly and shaken whatever hand was offered and smiled and moved on. Some people had looked up. A man named Kevin had said welcome in the way you say welcome to someone you do not expect to think about again. A woman named Sandra had given her a nod that was genuinely warm, the kind of nod that promised nothing specific, but meant she had been seen, at least for that moment. Deja had thanked her. She had noted the desk location. She had moved on. That was the last time anyone sought her out, which was fine. She had not come here to be sought out. She had come here because they were paying her $46,000 a year plus benefits, which was more than she had ever made in her life, and because the bus from Woodlawn to the Loop took 32 minutes on a good morning, and because her daughter's daycare was on the way and the centre opened at 8:30, and because after 9 years of assembling the materials for a life that could hold them both, this job was one of the first things that felt like it might fit. If you had asked the 14 people who shared the 12th floor pod with Deja Simmons to describe her, most of them would have paused. A few would have said something like quiet. One would have said she seemed capable enough. Nobody would have said her name without being reminded of it first. That is not unusual for a new hire at a mid-sized consulting firm in downtown Chicago in late October. What was unusual was what Deja had come from, and what she carried in with her every morning, tucked inside a canvas tote bag, along with her tea bags and her daughter's picture, and a yellow legal pad she used for notes that nobody asked to see. She had a law degree she had earned at night, not the fashionable kind of night school people mention to sound interesting. The kind where you study at the kitchen table after your daughter falls asleep, with a highlighter in one hand and the morning alarm set for 5. And you do this for 3 years and 3 months, and you take out $37,000 in loans to do it, and you pass the bar on your second attempt, and you celebrate alone with a cup of chamomile tea, because there is nobody to call at 10 o'clock on a Tuesday who would understand exactly what that moment cost. She had been working since she was 15. Grocery stores, then a call center, then a medical billing office where she learned how to move carefully through documents that other people trusted her to read correctly. She had moved from Mississippi to Chicago when she was 22, following a cousin who had a spare couch and a contact at a staffing agency. The cousin moved back 2 years later. Deja stayed. She found the logistics job. She found the night school. She found, somewhere in the middle of the second year of coursework, while her daughter was a toddler who woke up asking for her and then fell back asleep while she held her in one arm and read her casebook with the other, that she did not experience her life as unusually hard. She experienced it as the only life she had, and she intended to make something of it that would hold. She had passed the bar 16 months before joining Caldwell & Rowe. She had passed it while working as an administrative coordinator at a freight logistics company in Pilsen. She had applied to 22 firms in the 11 months between passing the bar and landing this job. She had received 6 responses. 4 of those 6 had been rejections within a week. 1 had led to an interview that ended with the interviewer asking a question about her undergraduate institution that she understood to be a polite way of asking something else. 1 had led to an offer. She took it. She took it on a Wednesday, sitting in her car in the parking lot behind the logistics warehouse, and she called her mother in Gulfport and told her, and her mother was quiet for a moment and then said, "I always knew." 4 words. Her mother was not an expressive woman. Those 4 words were the equivalent of a standing ovation, and Deja had pressed her lips together and held it. She came in the next day and gave her 2 weeks' notice. She left on good terms. She had always left on good terms. That was another thing she had learned from her mother, who had worked a hospital laundry shift for 22 years and had never once badmouthed the institution or the people who ran it, not even the supervisor who had once told her she was replaceable and discovered, when she missed a week with pneumonia, exactly how wrong he was. The position was titled Contract Review Associate, which was accurate in the sense that she reviewed contracts. It was also accurate in the sense that nobody above her reviewed her. She was at the bottom of a hierarchy she had not yet fully mapped, and the people above her were busy with things they considered more important, which meant they were mostly not thinking about her at all. This suited Deja fine. She had learned not to need to be seen in order to do the work. The envelope was found on her first day back after the Thanksgiving break. She came in at 8:45, which was earlier than most of her floor and later than she would have preferred because her daughter's daycare did not open until 8:30, and the bus from Woodlawn to the Loop ran slow in the cold. She hung her coat, pressed her tea bag against the edge of her mug, and found the manila envelope on her chair, relocated there presumably by someone who had finally read the label. She opened it. Inside were 11 pages from the legal department of a company called Norris Industrial Partners, a mid-sized manufacturing firm based in Rockford, 75 miles north. Norris had been a client of Caldwell and Rowe for 6 years. They were in the middle of a merger with a larger entity called Hargrove Capital Group, a private equity consortium that had been absorbing regional manufacturers across the Midwest for the past 4 years. The merger was valued at approximately $212 million. The closing was scheduled for January 10th, 6 weeks away. The papers in the envelope were a draft term sheet and a request for a contract review, marked routine by whoever had processed it before routing it down. Deja read through the term sheet once, then she started her legal pad. If you have ever worked in a place where you are new and quiet and your blazer is beginning to show its age, you may understand something about how you protect yourself from being ignored. You work with precision. You do not produce good enough work that your supervisors have to improve. You produce the kind of work that leaves them with nothing to add. You do this not because you are performing diligence for an audience, but because you were raised to believe that sloppiness was a luxury, and you never had it. She worked on the Norris term sheet for 4 days. She worked on it during her lunch hour, at the kitchen table after her daughter was asleep, on the bus, in the mornings, with her legal pad on her knee. She was not asked to spend 4 days on it. She was not asked to produce anything more than a review summary. She produced a 40-page annotated analysis. She found 6 irregularities. 2 of them were minor and would likely have been caught in standard closing procedures. 2 more were the kind of ambiguous language that could become problematic if the deal went sideways and the parties ended up disagreeing about the meaning of a clause. The 5th irregularity was a valuation footnote in the asset disclosure schedule that appeared on first reading to be a rounding convention. It was not. She had spent the better part of a Tuesday night on that footnote, cross-referencing the asset schedule against the accounts receivable documentation that had been attached as a supplementary exhibit. The footnote referenced a depreciation adjustment applied to a category of manufacturing equipment classified under a specific asset code. When Deja traced that asset code back through the supplementary exhibit and then through a public regulatory filing that Norris had submitted to the Illinois Department of Commerce 18 months earlier, she found a discrepancy in the equipment valuation that, when recalculated correctly, reduced Norris's stated asset value by approximately $4,300,000. The 6th irregularity was worse. She set it aside and kept reading. In the days between Thanksgiving and Christmas, the office ran at a different pace. People took half days. Desks went dark by 3 o'clock. The coffee pot on 12 was empty by 10, and nobody refilled it past noon. Deja noticed these things the way she noticed most things in a new workplace, as information. She filed it and kept working. She was the last person on the floor most evenings that week, not because she was performing dedication for the benefit of a supervisor who had already gone home. There was no supervisor to perform for. She stayed because the conference rooms on 12 had a whiteboard, and the whiteboard let her map the clause dependency chain she was tracking in a way the legal pad could not quite hold. She stayed because the building was quiet and her daughter was at her neighbour Mrs. Bird's until 5:30, and the time she had was her own, and she intended to use it correctly. She found it on a Thursday, the day before Christmas Eve, sitting at her kitchen table at 11:45 at night while her daughter slept, and the radiator knocked and the snow came down outside the window of their apartment on South Blackstone. It was buried in an indemnification clause, subsection 11, paragraph 4, a clause that on first reading appeared to be standard boilerplate language limiting Hargrove Capital's liability exposure in the event of post-close environmental remediation costs. Standard language. She had read similar clauses in 14 other contracts during her first weeks at Caldwell and Rowe, except this one had a different definition of the word subsidiary. The definition was 3 lines long and had been placed in Section 2 of the agreement, 30 pages before the indemnification clause, in a block of definitions most readers would have scanned rather than passed. In the standard form of this clause, the definition of subsidiary tracked a controlling interest threshold of 50%. In this version, Hargrove Capital's attorney had redefined subsidiary to require a 67% controlling interest. That single shift in threshold meant that 3 of Norris Industrial's operating divisions would fall outside the definition of subsidiary during a transitional holding period of up to 18 months post-close, which meant that environmental remediation costs incurred by those divisions during those 18 months would not be covered by Hargrove's indemnification umbrella, which meant that those costs, if triggered, would fall to Norris's existing workforce under the terms of the operational continuity agreement that was embedded 22 pages further into the term sheet. The operational continuity agreement required that Norris maintain its current workforce at a minimum of 90% headcount through the end of the transitional period. Norris Industrial Partners employed 403 people in Rockford, Illinois. She sat with that for a long moment. The radiator knocked. The snow came down. Her daughter's nightlight glowed amber through the cracked bedroom door. She wrote on her legal pad, "If environmental liability triggers during transition, workforce covenant plus liability gap equals potential closure rationale." She circled it. Then she drew an arrow from the circle down to a second note she had written earlier about the workforce retention requirement. She stared at the 2 notes and the arrow connecting them for a long time. She was not an alarmist. She was methodical. She did not want to be the new hire who raised a flag on something that turned out to be standard industry practice she was not yet experienced enough to recognize. She had spent 3 years learning how to be precise, and precision meant not overstating what you saw. So she went back through the document one more time, and then she pulled up the Illinois Department of Commerce filing again on her laptop, and she traced the asset code through a second path, a longer one, through the regulatory compliance addendum, and it still led to the same place. The liability gap was real. The workforce exposure was real. She thought about 403 people in Rockford, Illinois, who did not know their jobs might depend on a 3-line definition in Section 2 of a document that was scheduled to close in 6 weeks. People who were probably home right now on the night before Christmas Eve, doing what people did: wrapping presents, making dinner, watching something, going to sleep without knowing. She did not sleep well that night. The next morning was Christmas Eve. Deja came in anyway. The office ran a half-day skeleton crew, and she was one of maybe 9 people on the floor. She had gotten on the bus at 8:15 with her tote bag and her tea bag and her legal pad. And when she had arrived, the elevator bay was quiet, and the reception desk on 14 was unmanned, and the lobby had the hollow quality of a building that is not quite itself. She sat down at her desk and typed up her full analysis. All 40 pages. She formatted it the way she had been formatting internal memos since her 3rd week, which was to say carefully, with page numbers and a table of contents and exhibits numbered to match the references in the body. She read through it twice for errors. She found 2 formatting inconsistencies and corrected them. Then she wrote the cover note to Gary Feld. She wrote it 3 times before she was satisfied with it. The first version was too deferential, the kind of note a person writes when they are not sure they have the standing to say what they are saying. She crossed it out. The second version was cleaner but buried the 6th item too deep. She crossed that out too. The third version was 2 short paragraphs. The first named the items briefly and said the 6th had implications she thought warranted a closer look before close. The second asked if he had a few minutes to discuss when he was back. She printed it. She signed her name. She put the memo and the cover note in Gary's inbox, which sat outside his office behind a frosted glass partition. The partition had a small ceramic star hanging from it, a piece of office Christmas decor that swayed when she walked past. She took the bus home. She picked up her daughter from Mrs. Bird's apartment, where the television was playing a holiday movie, and Mrs. Bird had given her a cup of warm apple juice, and her daughter was wearing the expression of a child who has been very pleasantly looked after for several hours. Deja thanked Mrs. Bird, and they walked home, and she made grilled cheese for dinner, and they watched a movie together on the couch. Her daughter curled against her side until her daughter fell asleep, and Deja carried her to bed. She sat at the kitchen table for a while afterward. The apartment was quiet. The snow had stopped and the street was orange from the streetlights. She did not think about the memo. She had said what she needed to say, and now it was Gary's inbox, and now it was Christmas Eve, and there was nothing more she could do tonight. She made herself a cup of tea. She sat with it. She was tired in the clean way that follows a week of concentrated work, the kind of tired that is almost like a reward in itself. Gary Feld had been at Caldwell and Rowe for 11 years. He was a competent man with a heavy workload and a habit of processing his inbox in batches, which meant that the batch containing Deja's memo sat until the 2nd of January, 4 business days after New Year's. He read the summary page. He read the 6 flagged items. He paused at the 6th item for a moment, and then he walked the whole packet down the hall to a senior partner named Patricia Osey. Patricia Osey was 51, sharp and precise, and she had built her reputation at this firm on knowing when something she did not expect required her full attention. She read Deja's analysis from the beginning, all 40 pages. Then she asked Gary to send the analyst in. Deja sat across the desk from Patricia in the only chair that was not stacked with binders, and Patricia looked at her for a moment before she spoke. "Walk me through item 6, Patricia said. Deja walked her through it. She had the legal pad with her. She did not need it. She had the logic of the clause sequence in her head. She talked for 8 minutes. Patricia did not interrupt. When Deja finished, Patricia was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "How long have you been with the firm?" Deja said, 7 weeks. Patricia said, "Where did you practice before this?" Deja said, "I was an administrative coordinator. I passed the bar in September of last year." Patricia picked up her phone and called Norris Industrial's general counsel. She did not have to look up the number. She had it memorized, which was itself an indication of how many hours she had put into this account. She said, "I'm going to have one of our contract analysts walk you through something we found in the term sheet. It's going to require a red line conversation before we close." She paused. "Yes, before January 10th. I'll get it to you by Wednesday." She hung up. She looked at Deja. "Wednesday," she said, "means you and I are going to work through the red line language this weekend. Are you available Saturday?" Deja said yes. She was thinking about daycare hours and bus schedules. She would work it out. She always worked it out. She called Mrs. Bird that evening and asked if she could watch her daughter Saturday and Sunday. And Mrs. Bird said, "Of course, baby, you handle your business." And Deja thanked her and wrote out the emergency contact sheet and the snack preferences and left a folded $20 under the fruit bowl in the kitchen, which Mrs. Bird would find and very likely refuse to keep. The red line process ran from Saturday morning through Monday evening. Deja arrived at the office at 8:45 on Saturday to find Patricia already there, standing at the window of the 14th floor conference room with a cup of coffee, looking out at the city. She turned when Deja knocked at the open door, and she did not say good morning in a way that suggested she expected other kinds of associates to arrive at 8:45 on a Saturday. She just said, "Sit down," and pulled the red line term sheet from the table and handed it across. Winston Reed arrived at 9. He was thorough and attentive, and he asked several good questions about the clause dependency chain that Deja answered clearly, tracing the logic back through the definitions section on the whiteboard in the corner. She was aware that it was Winston who had reviewed the original term sheet in September. She did not draw attention to this. It was not her place to draw attention to it, and it would not have served anyone to do so. Winston was not her opponent. He was doing what she was doing, which was trying to get the language right before January 10th. By noon on Saturday, they had a clean draft of the proposed red line. Patricia read through it twice, made 4 revisions in a careful, neat hand, and said they would review it together again after lunch. Deja had brought her lunch from home, a container of rice and black-eyed peas she had made the night before and packed in the tote bag alongside her legal pad. She ate at the conference table while Winston went out and Patricia made calls from her office. The weekend had the quality of work that happens outside the ordinary rhythm, where the building itself seems to slow down, and the only sound is the heat coming through the vents and the occasional elevator. Deja had worked through weekends before. She had studied through weekends, through holidays, through the first warm weekends of spring when her daughter wanted to go to the park and she could only manage an hour before the casebook was open again. She was not afraid of weekends. She was, in fact, familiar with them in a way that most of the people in this building were not. On Monday afternoon, Hargrove Capital's lead attorney, a man named Calvin Cho, called into the session. He had been briefed on the flagged clause. He arrived on the call with a revised red line in hand, which suggested that his client had already known the definition was going to be a point of contention. What followed was a 7-hour negotiation session that began at 2 in the afternoon and ended at 9 in the evening on a Monday in January. Deja sat at the conference table for all 7 hours. She had a legal pad and a bottle of water and no dinner. Patricia did most of the speaking. When Patricia asked her a question, she answered it. When she saw something in the language that was being proposed that created a new problem, she wrote a note and slid it to Patricia. There were 4 notes. Patricia received them without comment, read each one in the same unhurried way, and incorporated each point into the conversation as if she had already been planning to raise it. She never said where the note had come from. She did not need to. Calvin Cho was dealing with one opponent, which was Patricia, which was all he had anticipated dealing with when he arrived on the call. He was not watching the quiet woman at the end of the table with the legal pad. This was, Deja had come to understand, how a lot of things happened in the world. The person doing the watching was not always the person doing the talking. The fact that the note was in her handwriting and the point originated in her analysis did not need to be announced for the point to land. The final agreed language restored the 50% controlling interest threshold. It added a supplementary indemnification rider covering the 3 at-risk operating divisions through the end of the transitional period. It required Hargrove Capital to fund an environmental remediation reserve at close in an amount that would be disclosed in the amended agreement. Calvin, representing Hargrove, agreed to the changes. He did not agree enthusiastically. He agreed because Patricia had made clear, quietly and without drama, that Caldwell and Rowe would not recommend Norris's board approve the close on the existing terms. And Hargrove wanted this deal. They had wanted it for 18 months. The amended term sheet was signed on January 8th, 2 days before the original scheduled close. 403 people in Rockford, Illinois went to work the following Monday without knowing anything had changed. Some of them would have known something had been unsettled. Not because anyone told them, because there is a particular quality to the silence around a thing that almost went wrong, an absence of the news that would have disrupted everything. A Monday morning that arrives normal when the preceding weeks had held a low hum of uncertainty in the background. Some of the plant supervisors at Norris Industrial had probably felt that hum. Some of them might have mentioned it to their spouses over dinner, a vague something in the works, some merger business. The kind of thing you say when you want someone to understand that the ground might shift without wanting to frighten them. And then the Monday came, and it was ordinary, and the hum faded, and within a few weeks it was just a Monday, which is what all Mondays eventually become. Nobody called a press conference, nobody sent an email. The amended term sheet was a legal document filed with the relevant entities and stored in a record system and eventually archived, along with thousands of other such documents, in the same way that the support structure of a bridge is held inside the bridge rather than displayed on its surface. You do not see the work that keeps the thing standing. You walk across. If you have ever heard about a moment like this second-hand, after the fact from someone who was not there, you may know how the story gets flattened. Someone found a mistake in a contract. The lawyers fixed it. The deal went through. People kept their jobs. These sentences are true. They are also the difference between a map and the territory. They leave out the $700 Deja spent on after-hours daycare over the course of that weekend, charged to a credit card she had already stretched. They leave out the Tuesday morning in mid-November when she had been sitting at that same kitchen table and had very nearly decided not to take the job at all because the salary was low and the bus ride was long and she was not sure she would last in a place that did not seem to know she was there. They leave out the 3 years and 3 months of studying at the kitchen table, the second bar exam, the $37,000 she still owed. They leave out the fact that she did not say a word to anyone about what was in those 11 pages from Norris Industrial Partners until she had spent 4 days making absolutely certain she was right. Not because she was afraid of being wrong, because she had learned that when you are new and quiet and your one blazer is starting to show its age, you do not raise your hand for something that might be nothing. You raise it when you are certain. She had been certain. Patricia told 2 people about what Deja had done. She told Marcus Webb, the managing partner, and she told the head of the corporate division, a woman named Lorraine Gibbs, who had been at the firm for 17 years. This was not announced in a meeting. It was said quietly, in the way that the most consequential information in any institution tends to move, not through channels but through a door left slightly open. Marcus called Deja into his office on the 3rd floor in late January. She came in wearing the charcoal blazer. She had pressed it that morning, same as always. His office had windows on 2 sides and a view of the river, and photographs of university buildings framed on one wall. He was standing when she arrived, which she registered as something intentional. He shook her hand and said, "I understand we almost missed something significant," she said. "I just did the review I was asked to do," he said. "You did a good deal more than that." He paused. "We're going to adjust your classification. You're going to move off the contract review track and into the corporate advisory group. The salary change is effective the 1st of next month." She didn't ask how much. She would find out from HR. She thanked him quietly, and she shook his hand again, and she walked out of the office and down the staircase to 12, because the elevator was 2 floors, and she needed the 30 seconds. She sat down. She put her legal pad on the desk. She pressed her hand flat against the yellow paper for a moment, and she breathed. Outside, Chicago was grey and cold and going about its business. A bus passed on the street below. The heat came through the vent near the window. Someone down the hall was on a call, the voice distant and indistinct, the sound of the ordinary world of the office operating the way it always had. Nobody on the floor had been told. Nobody had looked up when she walked back from the stairwell. It was just another Tuesday morning, which was what it had looked like from the outside. From the inside, it was something else entirely. She thought about the Tuesday night in November when she had almost decided not to come in anymore. She had been sitting at the kitchen table and her daughter had woken up and padded out in her pyjamas and asked for a glass of water, and Deja had gotten up and gotten it and carried her back to bed and stood in the doorway for a long time watching her sleep. She had thought then, as she sometimes thought, about all the nights the studying had cost them, all the bedtimes that had run late because there was one more case to read, all the Saturday mornings she had worked through that her daughter had filled with cartoons and a bowl of cereal she had poured herself. She had thought about her own mother, who had worked a hospital laundry shift for 22 years and had never once said it was too much. And she had thought, if that woman could do 22 years, you can do 1 more month. She had come in the next morning. She had pressed her blazer. She had gotten on the bus. The promotion letter from HR came on a Friday. The new salary was listed at the bottom. Deja read it twice, then she read it a 3rd time. She had been making $46,000. The letter named a number that was 58% higher than that. She sat with this for a moment, letting it become real, which took longer than you would expect. She folded the letter in 3rds the way she folded everything important, and put it in the inside pocket of her tote bag, behind her daughter's picture. She put her coat on and took the elevator down, and walked out through the lobby past the security desk, where the man she knew as Leon gave her a brief nod, the way he gave her a nod every Friday. She bought herself a cup of coffee from the cart at the corner, a real cup, not the tea bag from home, and she stood on the corner of Wacker and Michigan for a moment in the February cold, with steam coming off the cup and the city moving around her the way it always did, fast and indifferent and enormous. The lake was somewhere beyond the buildings to the east, invisible from here but present the way it was always present in this city. That weight of water you felt even when you could not see it. She was not invisible anymore. She had not been invisible before either. That was the part nobody talks about. The world had not seen her. That did not mean she was not there. She had been there the whole time, at the kitchen table, on the night bus, in the break room with her tea bag, in the conference room at 9 in the evening with a legal pad and a bottle of water and no dinner, doing what she had always done. The work. The quiet, careful, exact work that people overlooked until the day they needed it. And if you are sitting with that tonight, if you have ever done the work nobody saw and wondered whether it mattered, I hope you stay with this story a little longer. Because it is not over. The thing about a firm like Caldwell and Rowe is that when a partner like Patricia tells two people what you did, those two people tell others. Not to promote you, not to make a ceremony of it, they tell others because the story is useful. Because in a firm full of people who work hard and know their craft, a story about someone who found something that 6 other people missed, working on her own time in her first 7 weeks, without being asked, without being seen, is the kind of story that travels. By March, Deja had moved her desk from 12 to 14. The desk was larger. It was in a corner with 2 windows, one facing east toward the lake and one facing south. She had not asked for a corner desk. It had simply been the desk available in the corporate advisory group when her move was processed. She hung her daughter's picture on the partition facing her chair. She set her legal pad to the right. She kept her tea bags in the left-hand drawer. She was working directly with Patricia on a restructuring advisory engagement for a hospital network in Springfield. The work was detailed and complex, and she was useful in the way that mattered. Not decorative, but load-bearing. Patricia asked her questions and took the answers seriously, which was a different thing than being praised. Deja appreciated the difference. She had a nameplate now. Her name was on a door. She bought a second blazer in April. Navy, from a different store. Not clearance. She stood in the fitting room and looked at herself in the mirror in the new blazer for a moment, and she thought about the charcoal one which she still wore, which she would still press every morning, which had gotten her to this point. She bought the navy one anyway. She had earned the right to own 2 things. She took her daughter to a place with cloth napkins for her daughter's 6th birthday in May. They shared a slice of chocolate cake, and her daughter said very seriously that it was the best cake she had ever had. And Deja laughed for the first time in longer than she could easily calculate. A real laugh, clear and warm, sudden as light through a window, and her daughter laughed too because she had not heard it in a while either, and it felt like something coming back. Something that had been there all along, but had been set aside, the way you set aside the things you love most when you need both hands free for the harder work. After dinner, they walked to the waterfront, and her daughter ran ahead on the path, and the lake was silver and wide in the late evening, and the city was behind them. And for a while there was nothing to think about except the water and the path, and her daughter's voice calling back to her. And that was enough. It was more than enough. It was the thing itself. In June, Deja paid off $4,000 of her bar loan. Not a dramatic payment, not a final payment, but a real one, a planned one, from a savings account she had opened in March that was not for emergencies. She sat at the kitchen table after her daughter was asleep, the same table she had studied at for 3 years and 3 months, the same chair with the scuff on the left leg from the semester she had moved her casebook pile and caught the leg on the radiator and not bothered to fix it, and she transferred the money, and she sat there for a while after the confirmation came through. The radiator was quiet. The window showed a strip of night sky between the buildings, blue-black and full of light she could almost see. She had $33,000 left to pay. She had a plan. She had always had a plan. The difference now was that the plan had room in it. Room for the payments and also for the cake and the second blazer and the cup of coffee at the corner of Wacker and Michigan, the small dignities that a life in motion tends to crowd out until the day the motion slows and there is space for them again. Patricia stopped by her office in late June to tell her that the Norris account had formally requested Deja by name for a follow-on regulatory compliance engagement. She said it mildly, in passing, the way Patricia said most things, but she paused at the door on her way out. She had a way of pausing at doors when she had something left to say that she had decided to say, without quite announcing that she was going to say it. "You know," Patricia said, "I've been doing this work for 23 years. I've reviewed a lot of contract analyses." She paused again. "That was not a routine review," Deja said. "I had time to be thorough." Patricia nodded once slowly and left. Deja picked up her legal pad. She started the next page of notes on the Springfield Hospital engagement. Outside the window, Chicago was doing what it did in late June, loud and bright and full of itself, all noise and motion, and the lake catching the afternoon somewhere beyond the buildings. She worked until 7. She took the bus home. She picked up her daughter from her neighbour's apartment, and they walked the 3 blocks home together, her daughter's hand in hers, chattering about something that had happened at school involving a crayon and a disputed colour and a resolution that sounded, to Deja, like justice. She made dinner. She pressed tomorrow's clothes. She sat at the kitchen table after her daughter slept. She was not studying anymore. She was planning. Some people in this world move through it loud. They announce themselves. They arrive in a room and the room rearranges around them, and everyone remembers afterward exactly when they walked in. That is a real thing. It is not the only thing. Some people arrive quietly. They hang their coat. They pour their tea. They open the envelope that has been sitting unread for 11 days, and they read every page. And they pick up a yellow legal pad, and they begin. The world does not always know what it has until the day it needs it. And then, sometimes, it finds out. A lot of people in Rockford, Illinois still go to work every Monday at a plant that might have closed. Most of them will never know why it stayed open. It did. And the reason is a woman who pressed her charcoal blazer every morning and came in on Christmas Eve and sat at a conference table until 9 o'clock at night, who had earned the right to be there 3 years at a time over a kitchen table, who did not need to be seen in order to do the work. She was seen anyway. The work always finds its way. If that story moves something in you tonight, drop a line in the comments below. What does it mean to you when someone finally gets seen for what they have always been doing? And if you want to stay with stories like this one, there is another one waiting for you next, about a woman whose small, stubborn act of kindness came back to change everything she thought was lost. Stay close. This is a work of fiction. All characters, companies, and events depicted are imaginary and are used for storytelling purposes only. Any resemblance to real persons or institutions is coincidental.